Can you say that again?
The title on mine is Don't Chase After Ghost Gods.
There you go. Put that on your tombstone.
Samuel addressed all Israel. I've listened to everything you've said to me, listened carefully to every word, and I've given you a king. See for yourself, your king among you, leading you. But now look at me. I'm old and gray, and my sons are still here. I've led you faithfully from my youth until this very day. Look at me. Do you have any complaints to bring before God and his anointed? Have I ever stolen so much as an ox or a donkey? Have I ever taken advantage of you or exploited you? Have I ever taken a bribe or played fast and loose with the law? Bring your complaints and I'll make it right. Oh, no, they said, never. You've never done any of that. Never abused us, never lined your own pockets. That settles it then, said Samuel. God is witness, and his anointed is witness that you find nothing against me, no faults, no complaints. And the people said, he is witness. Samuel continued, this is God who made Moses and Aaron your leaders and brought your ancestors out of Egypt. Take your stand before him now as I review your case before God in the light of all the righteous ways in which God has worked with you and your ancestors. When Jacob's sons entered Egypt, the Egyptians made life hard for them, and they cried for help to God. God sent Moses and Aaron, who led your ancestors out of Egypt and settled them here in this place. They soon forgot their God, so he sold them off to Sisera, commander of Hazar's army, later to a hard life under the Philistines, and still later to the king of Moab. They had to fight for their lives. Then they cried for help to God. They confessed, we've sinned. We've gone off and left God and worshiped the fertility gods and goddesses of Canaan. Oh, deliver us from the brutalities of our enemies, and we'll worship you alone. So God sent Jerubbaal, Gideon, Baden, Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel. He saved you from that hard life surrounded by enemies, and you lived in peace. But now, when you saw Nahash, king of the Ammonites, preparing to attack you, you said to me, no more of this. We want a king to lead us, and God was already your king. Keep going.
Let's pause there for a second. Yeah. Give your tongue a break from all those funky words. What's so funny is I have almost different names in here on mine from the one names you read.
Well, maybe it's how I said them, though.
No. Oh, you know what? I'm looking at some footnotes, and there's some discrepancies in the manuscripts of whether it's, for example, Samuel or Samson.
Oh.
But these are not.
I have Samson.
Yeah. So there's some discrepancies among there. There's a ton of these little footnotes. I'm looking at the Common English Bible, and I just think there's just things where they literally can't read the letters. So Samson, Samuel, somebody not hugely important.
Would this be the Samson that pulled down the temple?
No, not that Samson. Yeah, unfortunately. One of the things I think that's kind of neat that's happening here is you get, whenever anybody starts to recite the great things God has done in history, which incidentally we do in a little way in the Eucharist every week. It's always kind of written into that Eucharistic prayer in some way. I always think it's neat here, starting in verse 6, you really get a window into the personal theology of the writer or writers. So they're kind of going, it's like they're giving it their own telling of the salvation narrative up until now. And it's kind of like saying, describe what happens in, the first 10 books of the Bible. And they kind of do it in about 8 sentences or so. But how they do it and what they're accentuating is a salvation narrative of what we do a lot of, particularly in Holy Week, of recounting the things that God has done for us. We did it on Sunday in a baptism. If you're at 10:30, the prayer over the water includes all the things God has done, water specific. which is really fun. I think it's fun for me to read that prayer out loud. I think everyone's just ready to get that part over with in baptism, especially the children. So, for example, you get in verse 6, the witness is indeed, this is my version, the CEB. The witness is indeed the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your ancestors up from the land of Egypt. I just think it's interesting that that's how they launch into kind of have Samuel's last speech, which is how it's labeled in mine, is kind of Samuel's theology. What do you all think? Anything stick out? Or at anyone at home or office, home/office? Okay. The last phrase, I forget, what is it in yours, Barb, for the end of verse 12? What's the very last sentence?
And God was already your king.
Yeah. Mine has an exclamation point.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord your God was already your king. So little bit of, I detect a little cynicism in Samuel's voice. Look at all these great things the Lord has done, and yet you want a king, but you had a king all along. It's just not the battle-tested king you're thinking of. Yeah.
So in addition to his preparing people for what they're going to face under a king, there's some self-justification going on at the beginning where he said, did I treat you well? Did I do what I was supposed to?
Yeah.
And yeah, you did. Well, you wanted a king, and this is what you're going to get. So just remember the way things were when I was in charge.
Yes, in keeping with the election theme, it reminds me of Richard Nixon's, I think it was supposed to be a concession speech in '64 for governor. That's the one where he goes, "You're not going to get Dick Nixon to kick around anymore."
Yeah, that was after he was no longer vice president. Yeah,
right, exactly. All right, let's go on verse 13 to the end. Barb, if you're up for it, I want to just finish it out. Great.
So here's the king you wanted, the king you asked for. God has let you have your own way, given you a king. If you fear God, worship and obey him, and don't rebel against him, against what he tells you. If both you and your king follow God, no problem. God will be sure to save you. But if you don't obey him and rebel against what he tells you, king or no king, you will fare no better than your fathers. Pay attention. Watch this wonder that God is going to perform before you now. It's summer, and you well know, and the rainy season is over. But I'm going to pray to God. He'll send thunder and rain, a sign to convince you of the great wrong you have done to God by asking for a king. Samuel prayed to God, and God sent thunder and rain that same day. The people were greatly afraid and in awe of God and of Samuel. Then all the people begged Samuel, "Pray to your God for us, your servants. Pray that we won't die." On top of all our other sins, we've piled on one more, asking for a king. Samuel said to them, "Don't be fearful. It's true that you have done something very wrong. All the same, don't turn your back on God. Worship and serve him, heart and soul. Don't chase after ghost gods. There's nothing to them. They can't help you. They're nothing but ghost gods. God, simply because of who he is not going to walk off and leave his people. God took delight in making you into his very own people. And neither will I walk off and leave you. That would be a sin against God. I'm staying right here at my post, praying for you and teaching you the good and right way to live. But I beg of you, fear God and worship him honestly and heartily. You've seen how greatly he has worked among you. Be warned, if you live badly, both you and your king will be thrown out.
One of my footnotes here says Samuel's final speech to the people is both encouraging and ominous. The people are urged to serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn aside to follow useless idols. Samuel affirms that God won't abandon Israel and God has chosen them as God's people, which is consistent on God's side. Samuel himself pledges not to turn back on Israel, but to continue to pray for them and teach them. He may be handing over leadership now to the king, but he will continue to pray and to instruct. And then you also get in verse 19, the people are asking and kind of acknowledging that what they've done was a sin, evil. And sin, I think, kind of a harsh word for it, but I guess if you're looking at it in terms of choosing false idols over God, and that being political kings, maybe it is a sin. What do you all think? It is the number one on the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
I think the people are trying to explain out of the context of where they are in the exile, how they got there. And so they're trying to look back and say, well, maybe we never should have had a king.
Yeah.
But now that we're there, the best we can hope to is return to the days of the Davidic king, who was the good king, which is what Samuel is going to be is setting up here. He's setting up that Saul is going to definitely be the fall guy here, and David's going to be the comparison, the good guy. And but out of the context of exile, they're trying to explain in a lot of ways how they got to their situation. How did we end up in this mess? We're supposed to be God's people, and here we are in exile. The northern kingdom is gone, so anyway. So
it's a great example of how hindsight's 2020, and they're looking back on their origin story, but through this very thick lens of we must have brought this upon ourselves somehow. So that's how you get this kind of it's not over the top, but it's present there that they're very remorseful and kind of going, things went bad when we got a political king. In the context of the story, it's almost a little funny to me because Saul, I mean, it's almost like he's still at the party for his consecration or something, and they're already going like, what a giant mistake we've made. And he's like, it started. So it didn't probably go that way. It's probably something that they're, like David's saying, they're remembering this, that as we retell the story to ourselves, we need to realize that this was where we went astray.
And they can't theologically blame God. That's right. Just unacceptable.
That's not going to go well.
There's got to be a reason. It's not that these gods are greater, or that God failed, or that God, it's not God's fault. It has to be our fault. So
I have a question. What happens to Samuel now that Saul is going to be king? This says it's his last speech, so he's his last speech as the last judge, but is he still prophet? Does he still do any prophesying between now and his death? Or is he just a really old man and just
seems to me like, doesn't he still counsel Saul?
Yeah.
Going to Saul and counseling Saul himself,
right.
Not the people anymore, but
he's kind of morphing into more of a kind of a consigliere, so like Robert Duvall's character in The Godfather, kind of an advisor. And it's not like the idea that he's speaking on behalf of the Lord, I think, gets kind of muted or lost in the thing, but he's not going away. It's also an answer to your question, Leslie. It's his last speech, but he will be there kind of lurking around.
Kind of in the background.
Yeah, exactly. I know he's there with David, but I don't know for how long before we get Nathan. But it really is like that Richard Nixon speech of just kind of going, he's kind of bitter and just going like, there's no do-overs here, I'm out of here. Of course, Nixon came back 4 years later.
yeah.
Semantic. Any other thoughts, anyone? Any questions? Shall we press on? All right. This next passage reeks to me of a switch in storytellers back to probably a different community writing this next section. Again, we're often looking at chronology. We're looking for things to make sense in time, but Bible writers, that's not how they work. So, they may jump ahead to Samuel's, quote unquote final speech, and now they may time travel back a little and say, okay, where are we in the story here? So that's how you get chapter 13. I'll read this from some big words in here. Just prove I can do this. I'm going to read from the Common English Bible. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he ruled over Israel 42 years. Saul selected 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 of those were with Saul at Michmash. I want to say Mishmash. Michmash in the hills near Bethel. And 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. Little ring your bells. Jonathan's first appearance in the Bible. This is a great character.
That's Saul's son, right?
Yep, exactly. He sent the remaining men home. Jonathan attacked the Philistine fort at Geba, and the Philistines heard about it. So Saul sounded the alarm throughout the land and said, Hebrews, listen up. When all Israel heard that Saul had attacked the Philistine fort and that Israel was hated by the Philistines, the troops were called to Saul's side at Gilgal. The Philistines also were gathered to fight against Israel. They brought 30,000 chariots with them, 6,000 cavalry, and as many soldiers as there is sand on the seashore to fight Israel. They marched up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth Aven. When the Israelites saw that they were in trouble and that their troops were threatened, they hid in caves, in thickets, among rocks, in tunnels, and in cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan River, going into the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul stayed at Gilgal, but the troops followed him anxiously. He waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and his troops began to desert. So Saul ordered, bring me the entirely burnt offering and the well-being sacrifices. Then he offered the entirely burnt offering. The very moment Saul finished offering up the entirely burned offering, Samuel arrived. Saul went out to meet him and welcome him. But Samuel said, what have you done? I saw that my troops were deserting, Saul replied. You hadn't arrived by the appointed time, and the Philistines were gathering at Michmash. I thought the Philistines are about to march against me at Gilgal, and I haven't yet sought the Lord's favor. So I took control of myself, interesting, and offered the entirely burned offering. How stupid of you to have broken the commands the Lord your God gave you, Samuel told Saul. The Lord would have established your rule over Israel forever, but now your rule won't last. The Lord will search for a man following the Lord's own heart, and the Lord will commission him as leader over God's people, because you didn't keep the Lord's command. And I'm just going to pause there. I just wanted to kind of finish that thread, that thought. There's, again, if this was a movie, there's going to be lots and lots of scenes where probably things are going fine for Saul, and little hints, and then it slowly burns, and then you get to this climactic moment here where this happens. But again, they're not storytellers in the way that we are now, or even the gospel writers are, and they're not thinking about building up a narrative here per se, except that they're trying to get across. They're really just, the storytellers are trying to jump to the point where we zoom in on where do things really go bad, and this is where things are really going bad. First of all, here's the kind of kicker. I love in verse 6, they hide in caves, thickets, among rocks. What do you remember from last week about hiding? When Saul was being picked, he went and hid among the luggage. So the Hebrews are now kind of taking on his attributes a bit and hiding as well. So, and you can imagine the way they talk about warfare here, that how hiding is considered a little cowardly. So it's a very, I think it's a very introspective look on the Israelites' part to look back and go, we weren't just sinful, we were cowards. We didn't know how to fight. until David came along.
So is Samuel calling Saul out on the fact that Saul didn't believe or wait until Samuel got there?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And
Actually, Saul did wait. He did wait the prescribed 7 days, and Samuel didn't get there. It's not really clear what this terrible sin that Saul committed was, because there's other places where he makes altars and sacrifices. That's completely fine. It doesn't make it clear in the previous passages what Saul was supposed to do. It's just kind of mysterious what this great sin is.
Yeah, I thought it was that the troops are leaving and he's starting to offer these sacrifices, but maybe that doesn't seem sinful. It just seems like etiquette.
He wasn't commanded not to do that. It's not
right.
At least in our understanding, it's the whole thing is kind of mysterious what this great sin of Saul is.
And I wonder if the more important thing is how Saul is taking the constructive criticism. He's very defensive. He's like, what did he say? I took control of myself. I'm the king. I did this. Where were you? To really pushing back and projecting and being defensive.
Yeah, Samuel was late. The people were deserting the king.
Right.
Saul decided he had to do something instead of just sit there and watch them all, just march away.
Yeah.
And somehow what he did was terrible evil.
Greg, in the Oxford Study Bible, there's a note: the nature of Saul's sin is not clear.
Yeah.
So he did wait for Samuel the prescribed time. Perhaps he tried to usurp Samuel's role of religious leadership.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, was he's trying to be like, here, let's just burn some things. It's like having somebody come in and start to officiate Eucharist that's not a priest. That's not even a member of the community almost, just come in and be like, here, let's just do this.
Seems like he's trying to blame
he's blaming everybody but himself.
Because he said, well, you didn't show up when you told me you were going to, so.
Well, right. And, how does Israel's story of creation begin? With people blaming other people for their own sins in Garden of Eden. Everyone, it's not, again, let me be clear, it's not Eve's fault alone. Everyone's to blame. And everybody passes the blame to other people. And this is that in some ways is the metaphorical sin, as people are not owning up to their mistakes, led by their king. How about Michmash? What a great name. I wanted to point out, if in just some play with words, I know I've said this many times before, but there's always a different mix of people in this group. Verse 5, end of verse 5, they marched up and camped at Michmash east of Beth Aven. Maybe it's because our music team last night were picking the Christmas music, but we were looking at a little town of Bethlehem. Remember, Beit, B-E-T-H, means house. And the letter B in Hebrew looks like a little hut, like a little thing of shelter too. So anytime you see Beit on top, it means house of. Bethlehem, in the proper Hebrew pronunciation, means house of life, and also means bread. So if you ever hear like Lahaim, same word. So that's it. So you can just say, Beit Valentine for Barb's house, and Beit Geralt's for Diane's. There you go. What other things were interesting to you all so far? And then we'll finish out the chapter.
I was reading something here about out of my NRSV, the notes, and it says that Saul was according to the way the Hebrew was written, that he was a year old when he began his reign.
A year old.
He was a year, which is wrong. And see the translator's notes, anyway. And then Saul's son appears here for the first time as a grown man. So they're doing I think a lot of the stuff is being put together.
Yes.
But the time frames are not quite understandable for us because the Hebrew, I don't know if it wasn't able to be read well, or because some of the passages just weren't, they couldn't figure out the wording or however,
Right.
how I just thought that was interesting that, this first part of the chapter, it talks about him being, and then he reigned 42 years. That's what it says in the CEB Bible.
Yep.
And
Now
then,
40.
So then you go, okay, so something happens when he's 72. But now once they name it, you're looking for it. And I think that's where in antiquity, they were really hesitant to get specific about the numbers, or they just didn't care. It's kind of both.
In this Bible, the
Yeah.
numbers are blank.
Yeah,
Oh, there you go.
Saul was blank years old. when he
Really? Can I
became
see that?
king.
They're just oh my God.
Yeah, and it says that the number's lacking in the Hebrew text, and the whole verse is lacking in the Septuagint.
That's hilarious.
And then whatever the 42, mine just says 2.
Mine does too.
And it
What
says
we're
that-
looking at, they literally have ... where the numbers would be in their Bible.
It says 2 is not the entire number. There was something else. But
Right.
They don't know whether it was
Oh,
a
they
4
couldn't-
or a
ah.
6.
So yeah,
or
so
whatever.
getting to what Leslie was saying, again, here's like a defense for these copyists. So you write, let's say you've got a scribe, we're talking about the scribes and the Pharisees, right? So the scribes sit there and they look at one scroll and then they're making a new one. And it's going to take months and months and months, right? So you're copying these scrolls and you get to the number and there's a smudge or
Yeah.
hole or burn mark or whatever, and you just get to 1. Saul was 1, and then like you were saying, Leslie, it's like he can't be 1. So they have a problem. What do I do? Do I write it's 1 what? 1 decade? 100? Like, what are we talking about here? So some of them just left it blank, some of them just dropped in a number. And you see the problem already of just, people will set their hair on fire thinking the Bible is all a lie. It's not a lie. We're just working with ancient manuscripts here, right?
Well, the other thing that
yeah.
to me isn't the Hebrew calendar different than the Julian
It is.
calendar?
It is. Yeah.
Is it how much is a year in Hebrew time as
Right.
far as a year in our understanding of time?
Right. It's just, it's very different. What were you going to say, Leslie? I'm sorry.
The NRSV has the dots where
Does.
the CEB actually puts in some numbers.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, mine says Saul was 30 years old when he became king and ruled Israel over 42 years. But the footnotes have a lot of messages about the Septuagint, which it may be in your footnotes in your Bibles say LXX, that means the Septuagint. If you look at it, this Roman numerals mean 70, which is why it's called the Septuagint. It's I'm completely blanking on why it gets that name. Cue David with the answer, but that's the official Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, which would have been in circulation at the time of Jesus. Yeah.
It was historically 70 scholars, so that's the reason.
Oh, thank you. That's it. So, but there's problems in that manuscript, and so you get Acts 13:21 says Saul ruled 40 years, as does Josephus, who is a first century historian. Although Josephus elsewhere says Saul ruled 20 years. So somewhere between 0 and 42 is the answer, right? But there you have it. And yes, there's drama ramping up with the Philistines is really the most important thing here. And again, not the numbers, although it's definitely a fun rabbit hole. But this is the moment, or a major moment, where Saul is demonstrating why he's the wrong choice for king. Let me finish up reading from the CEB here. Samuel got up and went on his way to Gilgal, but the rest of the people followed Saul to join the army, and they went from Gilgal to Gibeah and Benjamin. Saul counted about 600 men still with him. So he went from 3,000 to 600. That's how many deserted. Saul, his son Jonathan, and the people who were with him were staying at Geba in Benjamin while the Philistines camped at Michmash. 3 raiding parties left the Philistine camp. One took the road to Ophrah toward the territory of Shual. Another took the road to Beth Horon, house of Horon, and the last took the border road that overlooks Zeboim Valley toward the desert. No metal worker was to be found anywhere in Israelite territory because the Philistines had said the Hebrews must not make swords and spears. So every Israelite had to go down to the Philistines to sharpen their plowshares, mattocks, axes, and sickles. The cost was 2/3 of a shekel for plowshares and mattocks, but 1/3 of a shekel for sharpening axes and for setting goads. So on the day of the battle, no swords or spears were to be found in the possession of any of the troops with Saul and Jonathan, but Saul and his son Jonathan had them. Well, glad we got that straight. Very important to make sure you've got your sickles and your axes if you're going into battle.
Yeah.
Only a foolish king would not have shored up all his weapons. And poor Jonathan just stuck with his dad.
Does Saul just have the one son, Jonathan?
I think there will be more children, but I'm blanking right now.
There's definitely more children. I'm not sure about
the right.
son. Yeah, there's because David marries one of Saul's daughters, Michael.
Oh yes, Michael. How could I forget? Michal.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're reading it because I can't see this morning because of these glasses. So
okay. I've got some bad news for you, Mary, but if the glasses don't help you see, then what good are they?
Well, they're not. I can see bigger print, but this is smaller print.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I'm finally going to go get the glasses fixed. It shouldn't be such a big deal, but it turns out to be. Good morning, by the way.
Morning. I was going to say, you snuck in. You did an Irish hello. That's great. Good to have you.
Yeah. I'm sorry I've missed so much. I'm really sorry about that.
No, I'm impressed you caught up where we are. So we're 1 Samuel. We're about to do 14 since we've got time for it. We could get in there if you want. Unless anybody had anything to add. That was just a short passage, probably not.
I was just going to say a little bit about the Philistines. That of course, they were trying to control the Hebrews' access to anything metal or arms. Yeah. They didn't want them to have that technology. And it's also interesting that more recent DNA evidence points to the Philistines probably as of Greek origin. They were like traders that came from that area of the world, and they came in their trading and they settled in this country and this area. And apparently, from what this passage is saying, they were pretty much in control of the region because if you couldn't have your own, you couldn't sharpen your own metal tools and implements, and you couldn't forge them or make them. Yeah, the Hebrews were under a pretty heavy hand at this point. They weren't able to, be an autonomous nation at all.
Right, and especially if 3/4 of the armed forces are deserting. He's got no weapons, no soldiers, and the Philistines, for all the mocking that they get, are, they may not be very cultured, but they are excellent fighters. So that's how they outsmarted the Hebrews and took away their ability to make weapons. Ooh. All right. Would someone like to read chapter 14? Maybe a different translation? Would you like to read it? All right. What do you got?
I've got the New American Bible.
That's right. Catholic Bible. I love it.
Catholic Bible. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his armor bearer, "Come, let us go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not inform his father. Saul's command post was under the pomegranate tree near the threshing floor on the outskirts of Geba. Those with him numbered about 600 men. Ahijah, son of Ahitub, brother of Ichabod, who was the son of Phinehas,
Mhm.
son of Eli, the priest of the Lord of Shiloh, was wearing the ephod. What is an ephod?
Priestly vest.
Okay.
He's vested like me on Sunday.
Okay.
Basically.
Nor did the soldiers know that Jonathan had gone. Flanking the ravine through which Jonathan intended to get over to the Philistine outpost, there was a rocky crag on each side, one called Bozez and the other Senna. One crag was to the north toward Michmash, the other to the south toward Geba. Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Come, let us go over to that outpost of the uncircumcised." So there's Jewish outpost over there, huh? "Perhaps the Lord will help us, because it is no more difficult for the Lord to grant victory through a few than through many." His armor-bearer replied, "Do whatever you are inclined to do. I will match your resolve." Jonathan continued, "We shall go over to those men and show ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Stay there until we can come to you,' we shall stop where they are. We shall not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we shall go up, because the Lord has delivered them into our grasp. That will be our sign." Accordingly, the two of them appeared before the outpost of the Philistines, who said, "Look, some Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have been hiding." The men at the outpost called to Jonathan and his armor-bearer. "Come up here," they said, "and we will teach you a lesson." So Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Climb up after me, for the Lord has delivered them into the grasp of Israel." Jonathan clambered up with his armor-bearer behind him. As the Philistines turned to flee from him, he cut them down, and his armor-bearer followed him and finished them off. In this first exploit, Jonathan and his armor-bearer slew about 20 men within half a furlong. Then panic spread to the army and to the countryside, and all the soldiers, including the outposts and the raiding parties, were terror-stricken. The earth also shook, so that the panic was beyond human endurance. So Jonathan and just the two of them cut down 20 people?
Yeah.
Wow.
Looking good so far.
Wow.
He and his young armor bearer. Now, Jonathan is a boy. I mean, his father is 30, if we take these numbers at face value. Jonathan is maybe like a young teenager.
Well, isn't he like a contemporary of David? Weren't they buddies for a long time?
Exactly. So, and then he's got a young armor bearer. So it's like a little boy, like a little, he was thinking like a little drummer or something. Yeah. Or a caddy. And here they are, these two little guys going out and fighting with some real gusto, but panic, and I think confusion too. Yeah.
So Jonathan did this on his own without his dad knowing? He just
it appears to be that way. Yes. Yeah.
This is like that show on TV about the toddlers in Japan that are sent out to do the
that.
What's it called? Old Enough or something?
Sorry.
No, what's it called? What's it called?
Old Enough.
Oh, wow.
I think they need to call it Toddlers on Errands, but it's called Old Enough.
It is. It is. Yeah. I mean, I get the sense in antiquity, when boys become of a certain age where they're like, well, you can hold a weapon.
Yeah.
Get out there.
Well, in Sparta, didn't they take the kids away from the moms when they were about 5 and put them into training camps?
Wow. Oh my gosh. All right. It's a bit of a long chapter. Do we want to keep going? See what happens? Well, let's do it. Here, I'll pick it up. I'm in verse 16, I think. Yes. Now Saul's lookout at Gibeah and Benjamin saw the Philistine camp running all over the place. Saul said to the troops with him, "Take a count to see who is missing." So they counted, and Jonathan and his armor bearer were gone. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the priestly vest," or the ephod, because at that time Ahijah, I hope I'm saying that right, wore the priestly vest in Israel's presence. As Saul was talking to the priest, the confusion in the Philistine camp continued to grow. Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." That is from the priestly vest. This is in my footnotes. Okay. Then Saul called all his troops together and they went into battle. The Philistines were completely confused. Every soldier's sword was turned against his fellow soldier. Even those Hebrews who had earlier joined up with the Philistines and moved into their camp changed sides to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Similarly, when all the Israelites who had been hiding in the highlands of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they also joined the battle in hot pursuit of the Philistines. The Lord saved Israel that day, and the fighting carried on beyond Bethaven. Now the Israelite soldiers were in a difficult situation that day because Saul had bound the troops by a solemn pledge, which goes like this: "Anyone who eats anything before evening when I have taken revenge on my enemies is doomed." So none of the army ate anything. The troops came across a honeycomb with honey on the ground. But even when they came across the honeycomb with the honey still flowing, no one ate any of it because the troops were afraid of the solemn pledge. But Jonathan hadn't heard his father make the people swear the pledge. So he dipped the end of the staff he was carrying into the honeycomb. When he ate some of it, his eyes lit up. Then one of the soldiers spoke. "Your father bound the troops by a solemn pledge. Anyone who eats the food today is doomed. That's why the troops are exhausted." Jonathan said, "My father has brought trouble to the land. Look how my eyes lit up when I tasted that bit of honey. It would have been even better if the troops had eaten some of their enemies' plunder today when they found it. But now the Philistine defeat isn't as thorough as it might have been." That day, after they had fought the Philistines from Michmash to Ajalon, the troops were completely exhausted. So the troops tore into the plunder, taking sheep, cattle, and calves. They slaughtered them right on the ground and devoured them with the blood still in them. When it was reported to Saul, "The troops are sinning against the Lord by eating meat with blood in it," Saul said, "All of you are traitors. Roll a large stone over here right now. Go among the troops and say to them, everyone must bring their ox or sheep and slaughter them here with me. Don't sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it." So everyone brought whatever they had and slaughtered it there. And Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar he had built to the Lord. "Let's go after the Philistines tonight and plunder them until morning," Saul said. "We won't even leave a single survivor." "Do what you think is best," the troops replied. But the priest said, "Let's ask God first." Good old priest. So Saul questioned God, "Should I go after the Philistines? Will you hand them over to Israel?" But God did not answer him that day. Let me just pause there. It's a fun story. Lots and lots of great imagery. There you get your answer from Jonathan. He is not quite on board with his father's rulership. My father has brought trouble to the land. What else? What do y'all think?
What is there a purpose to him telling his troops not to eat anything before they go into battle?
I think it's all set up it's probably storytelling. I'm guessing that things didn't quite go this way, but I think it's all a setup to the payoff of them getting caught eating raw meat, which is not kosher.
Yeah.
So that's where one of those rules came from, one of the kosher rules.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Then they can point back to it and say, "But remember in Samuel, the troops got punished."
Well, in my footnote,
It's a
just
sin.
as a aside, this ephod is not just a priestly vestment, it's a vestment worn when they are consulting God.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it must have some
So
magical power.
maybe I need a priestly vest. Yeah.
Ephod.
Excellent. Good idea. I do just love the priest is just, it's starting to play out so much like Game of Thrones or something, where you have this priest just standing there going, oh, let's ask God. All right. This guy and his God stuff. That's how Saul's viewing this. And God does not answer. So what a profound, if it just stopped there, what a profound kind of conclusion. Because God is not interested in this, right? Not at this stage. If anything, God is probably with Jonathan here and going, yeah, this is not working out so well.
So at the end here where he says, bring a stone over here and tell everybody, is he like forgiving them for eating this raw meat and saying, come over here and slaughter it the way you're supposed to?
I don't think he's forgiving them, but I'm not seeing much punishment either. But he is he called them traitors, and he kind of with the report to him was they're sinning against the Lord. So it is kind of a reprimanding in some way, but he's more like he's making them eat the correct way.
Yeah, he's not really giving them any
consequences. You can't eat like this. We need an altar. Right. Exactly. Fascinating. All right, we got time to finish it up. See what happened. Will God answer? Then Saul said, all you officers in the army, come forward. Let's find out what sin was committed today. As surely as the Lord lives, the one who saved Israel, even if it's my own son Jonathan, that person will be executed. Okay, so there's your answer, Carol. He's not happy. Not one of the soldiers answered him. So Saul said to all Israel, you be on my side, and my son Jonathan and I will be on the other. Do whatever you think is best.
They're just tired.
They are. They're like, whatever. We're just hungry. Then Saul asked the Lord God of Israel, why haven't you answered your servant today? If the wrongdoing is mine or my son Jonathan's, respond with Urim. But if the wrongdoing belongs to your people Israel, respond with Thummim. Jonathan and Saul were taken by lot, and the troops were cleared. Let me just pause there because I've got some footnotes. Saul, in the discrepancies in the text, Saul asked the Lord God of Israel give the right answer. Urim and Thummim were sacred lots carried by the priests.
Yeah, they were stones that they carried. Yeah,
kind of like big giant dice.
Almost. Oh, they're not people.
Nope. Yeah, they named them.
And mine says the meanings of the names were cursed or condemned, and then accounted whole or acquitted. So you kind of roll these.
Right.
Greg, would those two stones be similar to the black and white stones that we saw in Lost?
The words are yours, Susan. Yes, I was thinking that exact same thing. It's very similar. It's like the good and the evil. It's kind of like the fates rolling these dice. Exactly right. Gold star. And then it's okay, so here we go. They were taken by lot means they're casting lots over to see who are we listening to. So verse 42, then Saul said, decide between me and my son Jonathan, and Jonathan was selected. Well, we could have seen that coming. Tell me what you've done, Saul said to Jonathan. And Jonathan told him, I only took a very small taste of honey on the end of my staff, he said, and now I'm supposed to die? May God deal harshly with me and worse if you don't die today, Saul swore. But the troops said to Saul, why should Jonathan die when he has won this great victory for Israel? No way. As surely as the Lord lives, not one hair off his head will fall into the ground because he did this today with God's help. So the troops rescued Jonathan, and he was not executed. Then Saul stopped chasing the Philistines, and the Philistines went back to their own country. So let me just pause there. What if you can almost put it on a t-shirt. The troops always just say, do whatever you think is best. What should I do? We'll do whatever you think is best. And then you get, finally, they all stand. When Jonathan stands up, the troops stand up. And Jonathan says, so I did take some, big, what deal. And then the troops go, what is the big deal? And, you're these arbitrary rules. And Saul is a man alone. This is, not only is his son against him, but the troops are against him. So pretty dramatic. All because of eating and food. And just all to illustrate how just ill-equipped Saul is as a leader. He did not have the command on his troops that he should. And we'll finish up a couple of verses here at the end of this chapter. Saul secured the kingship over Israel. He fought against his enemies on every side, against Moab, the Ammonite, Edom, the king of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he was victorious. He acted heroically, defeating the Amalekites and rescuing Israel from the power of any who had plundered them. Sounds like another writer got in here. Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. The names of his two daughters were Merab, the oldest, and Michal, the younger daughter. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, Ahimaaz's daughter. The name of his general was Abner, Ner's son, Saul's uncle. Kish, Saul's father, and Ner, Abner's father, were Abiel's sons. There was fierce warfare against the Philistines throughout Saul's lifetime. So whenever Saul saw any strong or heroic man, he would add him to his troops. So I made that little interjection there, but I kind of meant it, that there seems to be a change 46 to 47 of a different community or storytellers. And not, it sounds a little bit like they're writing the ship of Saul's legacy, but really they're just, again, skipping around through time, adding some historic details that they, well, historic in quotation marks, details they all would have been familiar with, how all these people fit together. What did you all think? Any of this? Palace intrigue?
I have to ask something, and probably you all know the answer because I haven't really looked at some of this. But Saul accepted the judgment of the group, and he didn't just go away. He just fell back, and Jonathan led. And that surprised me to see this because of the drama that has been here before. Can somebody speak to that?
I can, but I talk a lot. What do you all think? I think it's a wonderful observation. I just want to see what other people think.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, I think it just shows how alienated Saul's being painted from the troops, and he's really being painted as the bad guy here. And yeah, and he couldn't really kill Jonathan, because if he did, his troops would have turned on him. Because they said, no, you're not killing him. You made a stupid vow of some kind and made us go fight all day with nothing to eat, which is just, makes no sense whatsoever. Yeah, it was insane. Right. And then you want to kill the guy that gave us the victory because he didn't obey your stupid command? I don't think so.
Right. And he's your son. Killing a son is not not when in warfare, not the wisest thing in the whole wide world. There goes your legacies.
Well, apparently he had an older.
That's true.
I don't know.
That's true.
There was an older brother, but still, yeah.
But I wouldn't say he's turning into the Mad King per se, but he is not in his right mind and certainly not equipped to lead a nation, let alone lead an army. And it's exactly what David said, that arbitrary rule of eating was just proves how inept he is. But I think too that the drama dies down because Jonathan and the troops stood up to Saul, and just kind of called him out on his baloney. Like, really, you're going to do this? Really? You're gonna roll Urim and Thummim and try to make a decision that way? Really? And so, almost an embarrassment. I think he just kind of shuts down.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that helps. You didn't miss anything, Mary. It's all right. That's all right there in this one chapter. So,
and then in verse 48, that which speaks to a different voice or a different source or something. Like you say, it's talking about Saul, and it says he acted heroically, defeating the Amalekites and rescuing Israel from the power. So yeah, so it's boy, that's a quick turnaround.
It's a textbook example of the thing we're always harping on here, that the scripture's in dialogue with itself, and at some point in time, either 47 to 52 got inserted in, or the whole section before got inserted in to kind of to go, I don't know who wrote this, but Saul is not the greatest king ever. Heroic is not the word I would use to describe Saul, and I'll tell you a story about that.
That's what I was thinking about 47 and 4 through 49 or whatever. Because it says here, when Saul had taken the kingship over Israel, so it sounds like they're going back to the beginning of his kingship, where he's already been king and he's been doing all this stuff, and Jonathan's been, doing well, and now he's going back, and it's almost like it's a different battle. It's a different situation, because it's not the Philistines, this is the Amalekites.
Right.
So it seems like it's a different time.
Right. I mean, moved on.
And so I don't know if, as you said, the first part was written in, or whether this little piece was just added just because they wanted to show that, hey, Saul wasn't quite so bad all the time.
And my educated guess, which I probably should separate those words a little bit. Maybe it's just a guess, but I would think that 47 to 52 existed first and was part of the thing they just repeated a lot, or they heard a lot until the exile. And now they're rewriting the story with the perspective of exile and looking at Saul's, I want to say ministry, but reign through a different lens. And now they're going, well, we can't, in the Bible, you don't take out stuff, you keep it in if you're going to rewrite it, but you add stuff into the story to kind of give it different shades of color. And I suspect that everything that preceded the honeycomb story, for example, is a later, not concoction, but later story attributed to this. Maybe it's taken out of context and moved here, or maybe it's a different community's legend. And they just leave that for us to tangle with, to just kind of say, well, the historically, for the last several hundred years, we've talked about Saul as a heroic leader who defeated the Amalekites, rescued Israel from the power of an enemy who plundered them. But that's not the full story. We know the full story. We know more to the story about Saul now.
Yeah, I mean, once he was undermined by Jonathan and all of his troops.
Yeah.
And that victory really belonged to Jonathan. Anything he'd do later would be sort of suspect.
Exactly.
Right?
But it wouldn't happen.
Like maybe it was one, but was it really because of him?
Right. Think about, again, really try not to be political. I'm trying to pick safe people here, but JFK, Camelot, story of his presidency, all of that. And then you go, and then only in the last couple decades do we go back, now that a generation has passed or two, do you go back and go, oh, he was cheating on his wife regularly. He was,
well, he also
had really bad back.
Debacle. If that had gone.
And
been.
And he got manipulated by the CIA, right? And and it's like that there's more to the story, but the legend had been purveying in a certain way for a certain point in time. Yeah, good stuff. That's interesting. So on the day after Election Day, we safely navigated elections. No, it's all right. Take care, everybody at home. Next week I will be out of town, but Charity will run the show. Yeah.
So
take care, everyone. Thank you.
Question about Sunday.